a demonstration of that. So I think we can begin. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Santa Cruz Pickwick Club discussion of chapters 26 to 32 in Bleak House. We're right in the middle of the novel, and we have as our discussion leader today, Mike Haye. Mike writes that Mike has been a member of the Santa Cruz Dickens Fellowship for over 2 years. He worked in healthcare for 40 years, living in 5 different states. He currently lives in Roanoke, Virginia, to be near his parents. He comes from a family of lifelong readers and bought his first copy of Great Expectations in 1971 for 60 cents from Scholastic Book Club. So welcome, Mike, and thank you for agreeing to be our discussion leader. I will now turn things over to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, John. And Courtney, thank you for all your help.
This meeting is being recorded.
Helping me with my slides. I hope that's not me. I don't know who that was.
It's not.
Okay. And anyway, I just want to emphasize the word fellowship. And I'd love for people to turn on their cameras. You know, part of the fellowship is we get to see people's smiling faces. And I don't think anybody's going to judge you for how you look if you didn't, just got out of bed on a Sunday. That's, none of us care about that. So I just want to encourage you that this is a fellowship and that to see you is great. But more so, we want to hear from you. And what I'd like to do is just anybody who's the first time, put your hand up, raise your hand if this is the first time you've read Bleak House. And I'm counting myself as first time because I read it so long ago. I have forgotten many of the details. And also, I think I had a bias against the book. As you heard, I love Great Expectations. It was one of my first books of Dickens, and I love many of the other books. And now I'm learning to love Bleak House, and I can see why it's so many favorites. Courtney, I know you can kind of help me kind of see how many. I'm going to scroll down through here. It looks like a lot of people have read it.
Yes, it
Am I
does. So
missing?
I think we had 2 hands.
Okay. All right. Well,
2 hands of first-time readers, right?
okay. Well, what I wanted to, good, yeah, maybe 3. Yeah. Myself and Margot and Charles, it looks like. Okay. Well, one of the things I wanted to reemphasize is no spoilers in our discussion. So we have to be careful about that because we're starting to hit that territory where some of the secrets are being revealed. And I don't want to know, but I do want to discuss. And but I don't want to, like, I've been careful about reading reviews and in researching and inside, even researching for today. I didn't want to learn some things, but because I kind of remember, I remember there was a spontaneous combustion, but I didn't remember which character it was. So that kind of shows you what my memory was like. So anyway, I just want to make sure too that interrupt me. I might miss your hand. Courtney's going to help me with that. I'm on an iPad, so it's probably not as good as like a big giant screen that hopefully she has. And but interrupt me at any time. We're going to try to make sure we leave. I'm going to go through the chapters one by one and then leave a lot of time for the spontaneous combustion because of that is such an interesting topic for all of us. So we'll work our way through it. I just wanted to get into the joy of reading this book, first of all. And Courtney, if you want to bring up after the title slide, there's my first quote there. It comes right from the very first chapter. So if you have the Penguins, page 416, in the next slide there. And it's just a good, Dickens does this on his chapter openings and many times, and just an opening sentence that just sets the mood. And when I was sitting down to read this, it was, of course, winter a few weeks ago, and I was looking out the window. I thought, this just really takes me there. Wintry morning, looking with dull eyes and sallow face upon the neighborhood of Leicester Square, finds its inhabitants unwilling to get out of bed. Many of them are not early risers at the brightest of times, being birds of night who roost when the sun is high and are wide awake and keen for prey when the stars shine out. So maybe not the nicest of neighborhoods, but now that I'm retired, I'm pretty much a bird of night too. But I love that about the winter morning and making it a character, looking with his dull eyes and sallow face. And it made me think I enjoy understanding um, writer's frame of minds. And of course, Dickens had a lot going on in his life. And in April of 51, his infant daughter, Dora, had died. And he was dealing with that grief by taking a lot of walks. As you know, he was a lifelong person who loved to take these long, long walks. But he started going into some of the worst areas of London. And I think this really affected the impact of what he wanted to write. Most scholars, I believe, say he started writing Bleak House in that fall of 51, but there's some evidence he may have started, with some of the ideas in the spring. He was living in Tavistock House or was having it remodeled. He had just bought it and was having it remodeled. So he was going over to Broadstairs. And Courtney, you can show the next picture, which is Broadstairs itself. And there's the house on the hill in the far, far back is called Ford House. And I guess the people there, of course, loved having Dickens in their community. And then the next slide, Courtney, and they called Ford House Bleak House. And I was lucky enough to go there and they have a wonderful Dickens festival. And though that was under construction, now that's a coffee room and tea room. And you can take the slides down now and I'll come back. So we know that the house that he used as a model is in St. Albans, which is where the action takes place for the Bleak House location. I don't believe it exists any longer, but as a student, kind of a student of architecture also, I like to see the locations. For instance, I went to Rochester House, or Restoration House in Rochester, to see the model he used for the Havisham's house. But anyway, I just thought we'd start out with a little bit of that and a little bit of the background of why perhaps he went this way in such a bleak direction in his writing. So we're in 26. We have a description of Mr. George and his man Phil's squad, and Phil calls him the governor and the commander. We learned some things about Phil, that he was a tinker's apprentice, and that all the neighborhoods that were his territory, including Clerkenwell, but he couldn't make it really because of his people skills. But he's very loyal to George, and even be a target. And I thought that's interesting. I don't know. Hopefully that won't come up, but I don't really know. I don't remember in the future where he has to take a bullet for George, but it kind of led to that. So if we can pull up the illustration, I'd love to have you all describe what you see here and what you remember from the reading as you're looking at the picture. So this is on page 424 if you have your book. Who wants to give what they see in the picture at the shooting gallery? Anybody? I'll be glad to start it unless we see a hand. So we have Phil over there on the left, and he's got his long gun, which kind of scared Grandfather Smallweed, who's being brought in by the coach driver and I guess the local, I don't want to say drunk because we don't really know that, but he's carrying him in for the price of a beer, which is tuppence. And then the granddaughter, the delightful, and she gets a lot of of adjectives during this chapter, the delightful Judy, and of course George in the center. And we can see the fencing foils down at the bottom, and the targets, and all the guns in the shooting gallery as well. And you can see Phil's kind of an odd character, that his size is a lot smaller than Mr. George. And of course, Grandfather being carried in on his chair, about the need to be straightened up once again. Any comments on that illustration? Anything that anybody else saw or wants to remark on the characters that we read about?
George has a broadsword in his hand.
Yes, he does.
I'm figuring out the technology still. I think George here is portrayed as someone who's very gallant, very proud. Maybe his pride gets to him a little bit, but proud, dignified, standing posture. It's like juxtaposed with Smallweed, who is coming in, has to be carried in. He may or may not be lame, I'm not sure, And that Smallweed hires those two people who are carrying him in just off the street, which is interesting. But I just think the contrast there is quite interesting.
Great point. Someone said something about the hat. Did anybody catch that message, or anybody want to speak up about that?
Mary?
That maybe, I'm not sure whose hat it was that was talked about, but you can see Grandfather Smallweed has on it seems like an overly large top hat. And Phil has on a kind of a cap. Okay, well, I don't want to spend too much time on it. Anybody else have anything? Do we have somebody?
Mary.
Oh,
You have to unmute.
Somebody needs to tell Mary that she's muted.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
Grandfather Smallweed is always described as wearing a velvet cap. So why is he wearing a top hat in this illustration?
good question.
It
Maybe he
doesn't
just
work for me. That's not Grandfather Smallweed.
he looks very dashing in his overly large top hat.
But it's everything that he's not. I mean, he's a nasty old hermit who wears a velvet cap all the time.
Right.
And that's
right
how he's described.
Sure.
So I just have a problem with him wearing a top hat.
It looks like he might have something underneath his hat, like a velvet cap.
Well, maybe when he
That's
goes out,
possible.
he wears one. When he goes out, he wears a top hat. When he comes in, or when he does business, and when he comes home, or goes somewhere else, or comes home, he wears the other cap. Who knows?
Who knows, indeed. It just struck a wrong note for me. I couldn't.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. I didn't catch that.
What is
Do we have Glenna?
what is what is Grandfather Smallweed's profession? Shall we say?
He's a moneylender.
Some have suggested that skull cap he wears is an indication that he may be Jewish. And indeed, he has the wrong hat on. So anyway, that good observation, Mary.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Lena?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we keep reading these descriptions of Mr. George as very erect, and I think the illustrator has really captured the guy that we've been reading about as somebody who's extraordinarily prepossessing in the way he presents himself.
The term that comes to my mind is a military bearing.
Yeah.
Right. I think we read several times that he's marshal and is always referred to as someone in the military, as sergeant, or as Phil refers to him, as commander or governor. Good point, Glenna. Okay, Margot?
It just seems to me that Judy is very, she looks very mild and and I didn't get that from her description as a character and what she does. She seems like, this looks like a very nice characterization of someone who's not really all that nice. That's all.
Good point. Well, she gets a lot of characterization in this chapter, that's for sure. I'd say I could see a little smirk on her, but maybe I'm just reading into it. Mary, did you have something else?
Yeah, Judy seems to get the same kind of confusing descriptions that I've forgotten her first name, the Stalybras woman in Old Curiosity Shop got. You can't really tell whether Dickens is being sarcastic or admiring or what when he refers to the delightful Judy. And we've already learned that she seems to be anything but delightful. That just popped into my head. I just thought of the similarity.
Great point. I definitely saw it as satirical. He calls her the lean female, calls her the grandfather's bodyguard. Now she is lean, so maybe that's not sarcastic. Grandfather tells George she longs so much to see you, which is probably not the case either.
No, there's a lot of sarcasm in that scene.
Right. Well, he does call her a young virgin, which I guess we don't have any validation of that one way or the other. And then she points her weazened finger at them later in the chapter. So that's kind of a wicked little. And I think we talked about before that maybe this family is afflicted by some sort of aging disease.
Oh, right.
Okay. Well, we learned several things from the conversation that grandfather. You can put the slides down, Courtney. We learned several things from the conversations between George and grandfather Smallweed, and I'd love to hear what you all remember from the reading and what you thought was important. So what do we learn in those conversations? Who wants to begin that discussion? And there's no right or wrong answers. It's just what you felt like you read about when you went through that. Don't forget, this is a book of secrets, a book about relationships and who wants something from somebody else. And anybody want to take a stab at that? Jonathan?
Just to get this started, what I remember most is just learning that Smallweed, at least he says that there's someone else sort of above him, that he's the middleman here, and that he doesn't have all this discretion that you would think he might have. And he states that there's somebody in the city or downtown, I forget what the expression is, that kind of oversees his lending. And in this case, he portrays this mysterious person as, very, very tough on working with folks that owe him money. And when I encounter that, it's sort of like, is he really making that up, or is that really true? And I think we learned that it is accurate. But so that's all.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. Dorothy?
In comparing the illustration we just spoke about, I think we have a verbal expression of the contrast between Trooper George and Grandpa Smallweed, who cannot get to the point and who goes through these verbalizations that get nowhere. And poor Trooper George, who's so straightforward and profoundly innocent in many ways, is overwhelmed by this, he says, smothered by Smallweed.
I love that term smothered when he uses that. You don't hear it in that context a lot, but he used it again in another chapter. Thanks, Dorothy. I'm going to go down through what I had listed and just stop me or interrupt. Somebody trying to jump on? I hear things. Richard Carstone has borrowed money. We heard that. I'm not sure that we had heard that before. Perhaps we had, but we learned that, and they had a little bit of a conversation about it. That grandfather's there for Captain Hawdon's handwriting, a sample of it, and grandfather Smallweed thinks the captain is not dead. A lawyer has made inquiries and wants a sample of the writing, and Captain Hawdon owes grandfather Smallweed money, which we may have known that before also. And then what does George do? George goes to get a piece of paper, right, or some papers, and grandfather, of course, sees him do that. So that kind of ends the chapters. Anything else on chapter 26 that anybody got from it that you want to bring up? Okay, we'll go into chapter 27, and just to summarize a little bit from this, it's called More Old Soldiers Than One. So they go to Talking Horns. One of the things that Talking Horn had in his side, he says, "You'll do, my friend," like he to himself. Do you remember that? And when he sees George there. And it's an interesting aside because it makes me think, well, what does he have planned for George? You know, more than just getting some papers from him. You'll do, my friend. Do for what? And at the end of this chapter, we kind of get more on that as well, that something else is going to happen with George. But George knows of Talking Horn. He sees the Deadlock portrait there in his rooms. Then they kind of play this game of you go first. You tell me what I'm here for. You tell me what you know. And finally, after they get through that and they talk a little bit about money, he says he's concerned. Talking Horn thinks that maybe George is concerned that he's going to hurt Captain Hawdon's reputation. And he says, well, you can set your mind at rest about that. Because is he dead or isn't he dead? And Talking Horn kind of leaves that open as well. Anybody else pick up on that? George says, let me think on it, and it'll come back later. And so then Dickens kind of takes us on an excursion to the southern part of London, and we meet the Bagnets there. And Mr. Bagnet artfully defers to Mrs. Bagnet. It's kind of a nice scene, and she's very wise, I think, and what the advice she gives him is don't stick your foot in the water where you can't see the bottom, basically. And I had not heard that phrase before, but I thought it was great advice. And so that's the opinion of Mrs. Bagnet that we get in that chapter. And then George goes back to Talking Horn, and he is told no by George, and Talking Horn has already suspected that already. And then at the very end, he asks him, aren't you the man that harbored Gridley at your premises? And he was a threatening, murderous, and dangerous type of person. And that's overheard by the clerk that's in the courtyard. And he marks George. And that's all I know. Does anybody have any comments about that from that chapter? Okay.
Just one thing I'll notice is that we're halfway through, or almost halfway through this novel, and we're still getting new characters. We're meeting the Bagnet family, and just in the chapter before we met Phil Squad, and we heard stuff about Phil Squad. So this novel keeps expanding, bringing in new characters, and for every new character, we have to ask the pertinent question from way back in chapter 16, what connection can there be? How are these new characters connected to the plot of the novel? So we've got some hands up.
Yeah, Barbara.
Well, I'd just like to say the fact that what you're talking about, John, that we have all these little threads that have to be woven together. The handwriting, the verification of the handwriting, the Guppy plot, which has to come back again, Joe, who has to come back again. I mean, there are all these things that are running that some of the connections seem forced, maybe like the Guppy plot, but he's got it all going so that we know something's going to happen. They're not throwaway characters. They're not just there for ornament. They will do something in this plot, which is fun.
Great point, Barb. Thank you. Glenna?
Yeah, I wanted to say about the bagnettes, we'll find out just how they're interwoven into the plot. But I think it's so interesting as a kind of a permutation of different kinds of marital relationships, because a lot of times a bossy woman is portrayed quite negatively by Dickens. And here we have the old girl treated so affectionately by her husband and by the narrator. And it's just, she's almost, the jelly bees and the bagnettes are almost, they're interesting counterpoints, because Mrs. Jellyby is so monstrous in her bossiness, and the old girl is charming.
Good point. I think it has to do with her washing the greens, maybe. Okay, Peter, do you want to add?
Okay. Well, I was going to say, we know that like George is like a good character because he has a suspicion of people who keep secrets. He just sort of. I don't actually remember what goes on with George later in the novel, or how he's woven into it. But we know that he's a good character because because people who are keeping secrets in this novel, like Tulkinghorn, have motives for it, and anyway. So that's just something that occurred to me. Like I've read the novel many times, but I forget it. It's like 10 years ago. But I don't know what happens to him. But we know that he's a good character because he has and that instinct is confirmed in chapter 27 when Mrs. Bagnet says, don't step in the water if you know it. There's a secret on the water. There's something being kept from you, and so that's worked up. And I don't know, there's an issue like I think the character who, Mr. Smallweed, he makes up this fictional character who's like the banker who's like, that happens elsewhere in Dickens. People using fictions for nefarious purposes, like the bad fiction as opposed to the good fiction, I guess, in Dickens, but so that occurred to me, and and that's part of like keeping secrets. There really is no person. You've invented this sort of other realm of this fictional character, that is supposedly responsible for all the bad things that you're not really responsible for things. It's this other person who's responsible, and that sort of like shuffling off of responsibility occurs in this novel a lot, and it's part of Dickens, it's part of the moral message of this. It's like, beware that there are people out in the world who are actually scheming, and like the Court of Chancery is, and like Tulkinghorn, and like so anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this, but George seems to be, honest and straightforward, and if somehow or another he's able to see through the false fictions that other people have been creating. He can't tell you why, but he just knows that there's something wrong with there. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Peter. Great points. Yes. Agree. Wayne, you want to add?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this may be somewhat discontinuous because I'm having real problems with my audio, but I have to relay a wicked comment by Virginia Woolf.
Okay.
Whenever things got slow for Dickens, he just threw another handful of characters on the bonfire. So I'm sure she appreciated Dickens, but she was a little bit, had a wicked sense of humor as well. Thank you.
Well, as somebody who just worked my way through Mrs. with the Rosenbach, course, I can appreciate that. But, you know, I could probably throw out a few criticisms of Virginia Woolf too. Like, don't make your book so hard to read. Okay, we won't go down that path. Anybody else want to join in on chapter 28? I think Peter brought up a good point too about the fictional character. I believe that the devil in the city is just their idea of a way to talk business without putting the blame on Grandfather Smallweed. But I don't know absolutely. Joyce, you want to add in here?
Yeah, well, I'm just catching up. Why were they focusing in on, why were they cornering Mr. George, about again the Captain Halden or whatever? What was the secret they were trying to get from him? And he says, I'm being smothered. That's where he says, by all this attention on this issue. What was it? You've probably seen it a lot.
Right. Well, Mr. George knew Captain Hawdon, and Grandfather Smallweed was approached by Talkinghorn, the lawyer, for a sample of Hawdon's handwriting, and he believes that Mr. George has that, or potentially has handwriting. So all we know for sure of the secret is that George went to get some papers out of a desk. We don't know if that's Hawdon's handwriting, but that's what everyone would suspect. Then goes to Talkinghorn, and he gets his advice from the Bagnettes. He doesn't want to give up the handwriting until he knows what it's for. What is Talkinghorn going to do with the handwriting? And he want to step into any trouble that he does not sure what the outcome is or what the real purpose is. Anybody else want to, Joyce? Did that help?
I get an idea. What is Talkinghorn getting to with regard to this connection? Does it have to? It doesn't have anything to do with Lady Dedlock. No association.
Well, I think we'll find out some more in the later chapters, and certainly even more further into the book, of what it has to do with.
Maybe I don't remember. Thank you.
Okay, we'll be going through that here in a few minutes, some of the other chapters. Okay. Anybody else before we move on?
Well, we do have to think about handwriting and why Talkinghorn is interested in handwriting. So, we'll find out more, but we know enough at this point to have suspicions.
Yeah.
Right.
I think George is protective. I think that's the word for him. He's protecting, and he can't get a straight answer from why do you want this information? And so he just immediately goes into protection mode because he's not going to give out anything that would hurt somebody else.
Right. Seems very wise. He's a worthwhile character, as someone else had just pointed out. Okay, should we move to 28?
One other thing I would say about the Bagnets is that this is a novel that has a bunch of bad mothers, and Mrs. Bagnet seems to be a pretty good mother.
I just have to say it's the Corps too. He's not gonna trash anybody in the Corps. I mean, that's military honor,
Great point.
That's true.
And the Bagnets, I agree. That's a delightful segue or side trip that we took with them. And they're all in the music business, which I thought was fun too. From the military world to the music business. So the son's on stage and the father's helping him, and the daughters were delightful also. Okay, so the Iron Master, we are opening back in Chesney Wold, and there is quite a lot of it about, I think, in class and society that Dickens is observing, just with his descriptions of Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock, and he uses that term fashionable intelligence. We really haven't talked about that I recall in any of our past. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what is Dickens saying here about the class and society and our interest in their lives. one of our discussion questions I had sent out. Anybody have any thoughts? We are introduced.
Where is it in what chapter are we in?
We're in chapter 28, the Iron Master.
Okay.
Okay, it starts on page 445 in the Penguin edition.
Okay.
Well, and you can just, in general, what you've read. Barbara, you want to start?
Yes, I just love this interchange with the Ironmonger and the Lord Deadlock is one of my favorite characters because he is such a dear ass. He his whole thing about what's happening to society, the floodgates and the fabric of society is being destroyed, and then he's confronted by this uppity ironmonger who has the audacity to suggest that anybody that was in Lord Deadlock's service was not being educated in the proper way. And, here we are with this class system. Lord Deadlock knows that his life depends on having all these servants. And is society going to change and he's not going to be able to live the way that he lives? Sitting and being bored and reading his newspaper and having gout. I mean, come on. This is the pinnacle.
Right.
But this chapter is such a perfect clash of the rising middle class kind of idea of as I say, the absolute audacity of this man even coming to talk to the Lord, let alone suggesting that this girl, Rita, isn't it? That she's going to be taken,
Rosa,
to be educated. And what's going to happen to society if they all get educated? It'll be ruined, right?
Right. Good observations, Barbara. Thank you. Peter?
Well, I noticed that there's a contrast between like the upper class, which is they're basically parasitic, and of course, and there are lots of indications that they actually do nothing, or they just sort of consume resources, and the Iron Master is the opposite. He's the 19th century version of the self-made man. And actually, he does work. Actually, he actually produces stuff. So there's a sort of the idea of the middle class, like the rising middle class, like and the idea of an aristocracy that just is somehow or another just a burden on the nation because it's all it does is consume resources. Chancery's like that too. Chancery just consumes resources. So the whole idea of there's a theme that goes through the novel, like Esther is another example of like the hard-working, character. So work and industry versus like laziness, skimpole, and parasitism. So in this chapter we sort of get the contrast between those. I guess Dickens's conception of what's wrong with society is that people don't work. The poor work, and the middle class, the industrious middle class, like Rouncewell, the Iron Master, work, but the aristocracy doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Patricia?
Yeah, hi. Logging in at a very late hour because I'm actually based in London, the UK. But what I would say is I agree totally with what Peter has said. This is a novel that is so relevant to what is changing, and what is changing partly because the middle class are actually trying to make a difference, trying to earn a living, and maybe not yet taking out the upper class. I'm not sure we've done that yet, but anyway, but they are making a difference. But the lower classes are still the workhorses. Mm-hmm. So I think that is so evident in this section of Bleak House.
Great point. Thank you, Patricia. And thank you for joining us all the way from England. Look forward to hearing other points you can bring up as well. There's so much here about class, and makes me think even what's going on now. Dickens writes that Sir Dedlock is saying things like the country is going to pieces, and we hear that a lot now, unfortunately. Jonathan, you want to add?
Yes, quickly on 416, third paragraph. This is Dickens' brilliant description of Sir Leicester, his response to when Rousewell, the Iron Master, says that I don't want to. I want to be quick because I know your time is very valuable and all that sort of thing. And Sir Leicester is content enough that the Iron Master should feel that there is no hurry there. And that paragraph is fascinating because it's talking about, Sir Leicester is described, is Chesney Wold. It's been there for eternity. The trees are gnarled. All these wonderful descriptions of how sort of baked into society, he is, in the family going back, many generations, in contrast to, of course, Rousewell, who is, as people have discussed, self-made. He's respectable. He's a hardworking person, and he's honorable. But even if he was a multimillionaire, right, that, Sir Leicester would never permit him in his society. And but it's very interesting. They talk about among the trees, there's a sundial on the terrace has dumbly recorded for centuries that time with a capital T, which was much the property of every Dedlock while he lasted, as the house and the lands. And anyway, just pointing out that really the contrast there.
Great points, and I noted that too. That Dedlock's own time. I mean, how must that feel to own time? So that's a great observation, Jonathan. Thank you, Margot.
Margot, you're muted.
I love the fact that it shows how trapped they all are in their particular positions. And, the fashionable intelligence knows exactly when Lady Dedlock's going to appear because she has to appear. That's part of their thing. And then the rich family sum has been divided by so many figures, and they are something over that nobody knows what to do with. And then at the end, not at the end, but in the middle, it says, the rest of the cousins are ladies and gentlemen of various ages and capacities. The major part, amiable and sensible, and like to have done well enough in life if they could have overcome their cousinship as it is. So all the classes are trapped within themselves at some point. They can't go in and out. Like you said, Dedlock wouldn't let I can't remember if it was Jonathan who said that, even if this Iron Master were a multimillionaire, he wouldn't be accepted into Dedlock's circle. because he would be crass. He's a bourgeois, you know. So anyways, I found this interesting. I love those paragraphs on the cousin.
Absolutely. I think they're so good too. And then we get the whole glimpse into Miss Volumnia and her life story, which makes it kind of fun also. But they're trapped, like you say. They're trapped in their position and they can't even see a way out themselves. Glenna?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that I think is so amusing about and telling both when Dickens is characterizing Sir Leicester, or the narrator, that anytime there's any hint of change, Sir Leicester thinks that there's a whiff of Wat Tyler. Well, Wat Tyler staged the peasant, was part of the Peasants' Revolt 500 years earlier. And the fact that Wat Tyler lives in Sir Leicester's mind as a terrible example of, give them an inch and they'll take a mile. So any change at all. And then it's, Wat Tyler, a new Wat Tyler will arise and we'll have the Peasants' Revolt.
Great points. I found myself wanting to talk back to Sir Leicester whenever he pontificated. And poor Lady Dedlock, I mean, every time she's described as haughty and indifferent. I mean, these are people when I started the book, I wanted to like, I mean, here they live in this great house and, hopefully they're nice people, and they're not, at least if, what I could see so far. Anybody else want to comment on class and society? The whole phrase fashionable intelligence, he started that off in, and it made me think about, well, when did this kind of stuff start? And from what a little bit of research I did, 1830s society pages started coming out in newspapers in London and New York. And then also we got a glimpse of the book they put together that Weevil puts up in his room in chapter 20, the Galaxy Gallery of British Beauties, which has Lady Dedlock's picture, like a I don't know what we would call today, like a Life or a Look magazine that you tear out, he tore out and made them pinups. There was actually a book in 1844. It was called Heath Book of Beauty that circulated portraits of high society women. So just kind of interesting that, then as now we have fascination with the wealthy and the royalty, and, ex-Prince Andrew's now all over the headlines again. And we pay more attention to the British royalty probably than the people in the UK do. Anybody else on this chapter? Oh, Pat.
Yes. Well, though, humanity has always been that way. I mean, look at the pharaohs in those ancient days. And, there was always an upper class and the worker class. So we haven't changed that much, and will we ever? I won't get philosophical about that, but however, it's just the same story over and over. But I went through this chapter quickly while you were talking, and I see in almost every paragraph, Dickens has pointed out the class structures. So I'm guessing, and John, of course, could help us with that, that Dickens set out to do that he set this chapter aside to point out the class structures and how the world is not solvable with all of those class differences. Okay.
Thank you, Pat. I agree. John, did you want to?
Yeah, there's several things that fit in here. Simple question: what's happening in the world of politics in the background of this novel, particularly with respect to the Iron Master?
Right, he's going to become a member of Parliament, I believe. He's trying to.
He's been proposed, but he has not said yes. But I mean, this is after the 1832 Reform Bill that expanded the franchise to members of the middle class. It's not a complete democracy. There are property requirements in order to vote, but the Ironmaster is eligible to become a member of parliament. And if he does become a member of parliament, he will represent a very different constituency from the constituency of Sir Leicester. And we have in the background of this all the references to Doodle, Foodle, Noodle, and Buffy, Duffy, Cuffy, and those are in fairly transparent terms the Tories and the Whigs. And at the edge of the Whigs, who represent the industrial middle class, and the Tories represent people of Sir Leicester's class. There's a radical fringe that, and the Chartist movement is taking place in the 1840s, and Wat Tyler is an icon for the Chartist movement, the movement by working class intellectuals and more than that, working class men and women in support of expanding the franchise fully to members of the working class. And so Wat Tyler has a not just a historical reference, but a very contemporary reference. And then there's something else that is people might not have noticed, and no one has mentioned, or I guess Mike, you mentioned Volumnia. We get a new character. Again, I'm astonished that there are new characters, and we don't know whether this is a minor character or whether Volumnia is going to turn out to be an important character in the novel. And what does Volumnia figure in this? She's a great comic character, and she has a propensity for asking the wrong question or asking the right question at the wrong time. And she has a habit of giving little screams when something happens that seems to disturb the status quo. And one little scream that she gives, I'm going to read a passage. This is on page 450, toward the bottom of the Penguin edition. And the Ironmaster says, "I must beg you, my lady," he says while doing so, "to remain a few moments for this individual." No, this is who's speaking. I'm going to pick that up. "To remain for a few minutes for this individual of whom I speak arrived this evening shortly before dinner and requested in a very becoming note. Sir Leicester, with his habitual regard to truth, dwells upon it. This is Sir Leicester, I am bound to say in a very becoming and well-expressed note, the favor of a short interview with yourself and myself on the subject of this young girl, as it appeared that he wished to depart tonight. I replied that we would see him before retiring. Miss Volumnia, with a third little scream, takes flight, wishing her host, oh Lud, well rid of the, what is it, Ironmaster?" So several things to notice about this. One is that the Ironmaster wrote a very polite and well-written note, and Sir Leicester has to acknowledge. Sir Leicester acknowledges things that are true, even if they make him uncomfortable. So the Ironmaster knows how to write, and he writes a good note, and Sir Leicester acknowledges this. Notice that he knows that the Ironmaster is under some pressure to leave tonight, and he has come in the afternoon, and Sir Leicester says that they will see him before they retire. So the Ironmaster has been waiting for probably for hours for this interview that he has requested in a very polite and proper note. And so the interview does take place. And at the end of the interview, Sir Leicester offers him hospitality at Chesney Wold. And the Ironmaster refuses the offer of hospitality because he has places to go. So he's in a hurry, and he has been kept waiting by the Dedlock family, by Sir Leicester in particular. And Volumnia, after hearing that the Ironmaster has requested this interview, which is in itself a breach of decorum, in that he's of a lower class and he has requested this interview on a subject of some interest to everyone there, and particularly to Lady Dedlock, because it involves Rosa, who is her maid. And Volumnia says, "Oh, Lud." That's an upper class pronunciation of "Oh, Lord." But in fact, Lud is a nickname given to a working class uprising and a mythical figure. Peter was talking about fictional characters. King Lud was supposedly the leader of a group of machine breakers, the Luddites. You've probably heard of the Luddites, who objected to the introduction of technology of spinning machines that put many spinners, weavers out of work. And Volumnia here interjects the name, or unconsciously, and Dickens knows full well what he's doing, introduces the name, the very name of the leader of the Luddites, the mythical leader of the Luddites. There is no such person as Lud. But anyway, these are the topical references to contemporary political life. The 1832 Reform Act, the Ironmaster running for Parliament, or at least being eligible to run for Parliament, the Chartist movement in the background, the way in which Wat Tyler is a name that is adopted by certain Chartists. Sir Leicester talks about opening the floodgates of society. Yes, the floodgates of society are being opened. And this is a moment, a proto-revolutionary moment, and we're watching it being enacted before our eyes by this confrontation, this very polite confrontation about a marriage proposal between a member of a young man who's the son of a working class ironmaster, and a young woman who's in the service of Lady Dedlock. And it has implications for Lady Dedlock, and it has implications for the whole structure of society. So Bleak House is a novel about a great political and social crisis that is happening, and it's being enacted sometimes in comic ways by characters like Volumnia.
Excellent point. Thank you. And Jonathan, do you want to add to the comments?
Just a quick thought on class and society. Just a reminder that a lot of you know, Dickens grew up in the lower class in England, and his family was they had a lot of needs, and the Dickens father and mother were, you could talk for hours about sort of how unusual they were. Dickens' father, of course, was in and out of the Marshalsea prison, debtor's prison, and also remember Dickens being forced to work by his father, taken out of school and put in the blacking warehouse. So just to say that Dickens hid, just remember that he hid all of his lower class background until after his death. The only person I believe who knew was his good friend and biographer, John Forster. And he was hidden so he could be in the high society. But it's interesting how he felt, that about that sort of being sort of in a member of the higher classes. He met the Queen of England. So just to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great points. Barb?
I just wanted, after what Pat said, I just wanted to point out that we've been set up in this tone from the beginning. As I think I pointed out some time ago, we've got Lord Dedlock at the beginning looking out on his lands and saying how he loved them being fenced. And that, of course, goes back to the initial laws of incorporating land and making land public and private. And we also have all that business about Joe, which is conditioning us to what's going on with the poor and how they are being handled and moved along, as Joe said. So that that's a thread that he has woven throughout this whole thing. We hadn't got to the rise of the middle class yet, or of the lower working class, but no, we do. What's her name says the woman that's marrying Turveydrop's son.
Caddy.
Yeah, she says that she realizes that she has to learn dancing, right, in order to be part of that class of society.
Or self-improvement, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Good points. Yes, Dickens runs these themes all through his writing. That's for sure. Okay, let's go to the slide, and we'll just talk about what happens at the end of this chapter. Lady Dedlock has basically talked to Rosa about, is she really in love? Ironmaster's son. And she calls her my child. Confide in me, my child, and don't fear me. She wishes her to be happy. And in this quote, it shows that Lady Dedlock may have a heart. She's looking into the fire, and this is on page 457, last of the chapter. In search of what? Of any hand that is no more? Of any hand that never was? Of any touch that might have magically changed her life? Or does she listen to the ghost walk and think, what step does it most resemble? A man's, a woman's, the pattering of a little child's feet, ever coming on, on? Some melancholy influence is upon her, or why should so proud a lady close the doors and sit alone upon the hearth, so desolate? So I thought that was, you could take the slide down now. An opening into Lady Dedlock's heart, and it certainly foreshadows what we are soon to learn. Despite all the descriptions of her being proud and haughty, I got from that quote, is there something about her that longs for something more in her life, or something that she lost? Anybody else have a comment on that? Okay. Well, let's move on. I love the ending of this chapter too. By the way, the cousins have been changed into leaves, the very, very last sentence in the paragraph. And then the next chapter, he starts with the leaves again around the house. They fall thick. The leaves fall thick at Chesney Wold, but they don't fall fast. I just thought, okay, even the leaves have to behave a certain way at Chesney Wold. So we're in chapter 29, and this is where the young man comes in, the young man of the name of Guppy. If you could put the slide back up, we're going to quote from the text. I'm really interested in Talking Horn's motivation and what you think. All through this book, we kind of get the sense that he's not a very nice person. And what is motivating him? So this quote is on page 459, chapter 29. Mr. Talkinghorn comes and goes pretty often, there being estate business to do, leases to be renewed, and so on. He sees my lady pretty often too, and he and she are composed and as indifferent, and take little heed of one another as ever. Yet it may be that my lady fears this Mr. Talkinghorn, and that he knows it. So we can take the slide back down. What do you think? What is Talkinghorn's motivation? Anybody have some thoughts on that? I don't think secrets, that he likes secrets. I'm not sure who said that.
Well, he gets secrets. He can trade them. He can use secrets for his own aggrandizement in one way or another. Right.
We learned that when Miss Grandfather Smallweed and George go to Talkinghorn's home, that he's a very rich man. And I'm sure that's from bringing in clients, and perhaps some of the secrets help him get clients. Glenna? Glenna, you're still muted. I'm sorry.
There are little hints that Mr. Tulkinghorn has contempt for the people that he serves, and is not averse to making trouble in his discreet way.
Absolutely. He just seems like one of those kind of people that wants to make trouble, doesn't he? We've all run into these kind. Bob? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
In one of the earlier chapters, they say something about, the author says something about maybe Mr. Tulkinghorn is not so fond of these rich clients that he has. I forget how they put it. And we were just talking about classes and all. I don't think there's much of a hint about that, but I was wondering if he's resents the upper class, that he's not himself one of them, I know we talked about last month, there was a lot of discussion about how I'm sorry, it was earlier. He was kind of sadistic and maybe didn't like women and stuff, but in general, I don't think he doesn't seem to like the rich folks that he works for.
I wonder if he likes anybody. We don't have any hint of that at all.
Yeah, he's a loner.
Right. But he sure manipulates things. Karen, do you want to add?
Yeah. In a previous discussion, we were talking about all the characters who are detectives in this novel. And I wrote a little sketchy notes about Tulkinghorn. And here's what I put down. I see him as a diabolical detective. He has this evil nature, and he uses detection to control, as Margot says, for his own aggrandizement, but he's devious. His moral character is really rather awful. He's very detailed in what he picks up as evidence, and he's kind of an armchair detective. He's in the intellectual realm, but it's all about how he can use what he detects and what he finds out as power over other people.
Great point. He seems very duplicitous too when he's doing that. He'll speak down to somebody like George, and of course, kowtow to the Deadlocks. Leslie?
The image I'm getting of him is as a spider weaving a web. I mean, all of these little, not yet fully understood, maybe not related little things he's doing, what he's doing with George, what he's doing with Lady Deadlock, what he's doing with Snagsby. He's got these threads, and he's trying to weave them into a web, and I just get the sense that he's doing it, that the web is getting more and more shape, and it's going to keep tightening, and I think that's what's going to drive us to the end.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate that. And it goes back to what we discussed some time ago about the allegory that's painted on his ceiling. Is he going to be judged or not? Eventually for this kind of behavior. So let's pull up the illustration of when Guppy is brought in. And we have a slide for that, Courtney, if you'll bring that up for me. And I'd love to have anybody who wants to add, just talk. What you see here. We have the character that's called Mercury as the butler, who takes great offense when Sir Leicester kind of doesn't really approve of having Guppy come in, but realizes that Lady Dedlock has asked him to come, so he defers to her. But we have Guppy in his 1970s pants. I think I had some just like that, and looking kind of outlandish. And Sir Leicester can't even be bothered to put down the paper or to greet him. It's actually, through what is written, he's very rude to Guppy. And then we have Lady Dedlock, and she has this incredible fan, and Dickens also calls it a screen to hide her face. And you can see that, and she looks very young in that picture, which, if she's Esther's mother, she must have had her when she was 16. So we'll find out. Anything else anybody sees there?
So, John, can you talk about the striped pants? Because I know that the striped pants appear in many of the novels that that Fizz illustrated.
Well, Guppy is a bit of a dandy, and he's wearing not pants from the 70s.
I know that.
but pants that are not worn by gentlemen. He's a young up and coming wannabe lawyer. He's a junior lawyer, but he's also a bit of a man about town. And so he's wearing pants that are avant-garde, that are the height of fashion. And they're certainly not pants that are worn by anyone of the Dedlocks level of society. We can just compare the pants that Sir Leicester has. But there are other so Dickens was a bit of a dandy himself, and Dickens, of course, was a clerk as a young man before he became a novelist in a law firm. And I think there's a lot of Dickens in Guppy, and Guppy is one of my favorite characters in this entire novel. And I think this chapter, The Young Man, is one of the funniest chapters in the entire novel. Guppy is also one of the detectives who's trying to find out information, and we should ask the same question about Guppy that we asked about Tulkinghorn. What are his motives? Remember, he actually proposed marriage to Esther and sent her into a flutter of tears and laughter. To what extent is Guppy a comic character? To what extent is he someone who's actually involved in part of the serious plot of discovering secrets in this novel? We should also remember that Guppy is making an entrance into the room where the novel opened. Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock in Lady Dedlock's not her boudoir, but her room, where where Tulkinghorn entered and showed the handwriting to Lady Dedlock that made her start, and Tulkinghorn noted it. That sets the whole handwriting plot in motion. This is also a chapter that follows the chapter in which another member of the lower classes has had an interview with Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock. So Guppy is, in that sense, parallel to the Iron Master. This is an intrusion into the upper class by, I overstate deliberately, a rebellious, ambitious member of the lower classes. So in comic form, this is a revolutionary moment. The butler, the Mercury, doesn't even want to admit him. For Guppy to request an interview with Lady Dedlock is much more disruptive and daring and a violation of protocol than for the Iron Master to request. What's going on? Why has Lady Dedlock granted an interview with the young man of the name of Guppy, as the narrator keeps calling him? And then finally, you've already pointed out, Mike, the fan that Lady Dedlock holds up that is a shield against the warmth of the fire. She sits close to the fire, and the fan is to protect her against the heat of the fire that might damage her complexion. But the fan also is a screen that hides her face, except in this instance, we see the face, and you commented on how young she is. And she is one of the beauties, the great galaxy of beauties include an image of her. And then another thing is the shadow that falls on her face because of the screen that she's holding up in front of it. So what is that shadow? Why is there a shadow on her face? All of these, I think, are questions that are raised by this wonderful image. And Sir Leicester is reading the newspaper. And do you remember what he reads in the newspaper? He reads in the newspaper reports that articulate the very thoughts that Sir Leicester has about the dangers of society and that reinforce his class ideology. So the newspaper is actually something that's very relevant here. So all of this is going on in this wonderful illustration. That's a long digression from the pants, but it includes.
Very helpful. Thank you, John. Appreciate your powers of observation and knowledge. Patricia, did you want to add?
Actually, I'm going to just go down the very ignorant route because some of you may know I'm actually an architect by training. Who was the illustrator of this novel?
The illustrator is a man named Hablo Brown.
Got it. Fine. Thank you.
And he used the name of Phiz, P-H-I-Z, which was a shortened version of the word physiognomy or physiognomist, which was a term for a comic sketch writer or sketch portraitist. He and Dickens worked closely together on the illustrations. Dickens approved personally of each illustration that Phiz produced.
Thank you, John. I'm showing my ignorance of Dickens' illustrations.
That's okay. We all have areas that we are improving our knowledge on. Karen, did you want to add?
Yeah, you all are just going to have to bear with me. I have all these notes that I made related to the theme of detection. So for Guppy, I'll just share what I have gleaned over my reads of this novel. It seems to me that little Guppy is a lucky detective. He just stumbles upon things. You know, he's out there in the world, his feet are to the ground. He goes to Chesney Wold, he sees a portrait, and he from that pieces things together. He's not a strategist. He's not a mastermind of any kind in the way he detects. He just makes use of what he sees, and then he figures it out from there. So I call him the lucky detective in this book.
Great description. Thank you for that. Hey, Peter?
It strikes me that Guppy is another one of the good characters in the sense that in a previous chapter in this like section there was like discussion of the idea of service, and Guppy seems to want to be of service to Esther. He wants to uncover something, her origin and maybe even her fortune, like she's connected somehow or another to the Jarndyce, thing, and that if somehow or another he uncovers that, it'll benefit her, and so he wants to be kind of service to her, almost regardless of the outcome. We know that he's like attracted to her, but it's kind of like there's a sort of comic element to it in the sense that we know he's never going to get her, right? Yet still wants to be of service, and it's the idea. So there's a positive intention to his detection, his motive for detecting the truth behind matters. It may not benefit Lady Deadlock or something, but he wants to be a benefit to like her. So I think of him as he's kind of like a character like, is it Walter in like a Dombey and Son or something, who's like trying to be a benefit to like Florence Dombey. He's trying to find her, he's trying to help her, and he's another sort of one of those characters in Dickens who kind of, for me, demonstrates the idea of of service. Like the idea of us being a servant to Dickens isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of a Christian thing. There's a kind of Christian motif behind the idea of being of service to other people. Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you. Excellent points. Thank you, Peter. Glenna?
Yeah, I wanted to just say one thing. The first Dickens universe I attended was in 2012, and we were discussing Bleak House then. And in one of the seminars, there was a group, 2 or 3 young women graduate students, and they all identified themselves as members of Team Guppy, which I have not forgotten. And the reason that they needed to say they were on Team Guppy is that he's a somewhat ambiguous character. He's clearly self-serving, but is he only self-serving? And I mean, Dickens in some circles has gotten a bad rap for having characters that are black and white, one thing or the other. But there are a number of characters in this novel that redeem themselves in various ways or not. And I think Guppy is a very interesting character for that reason.
Agreed. He is an interesting character, and we'll talk a minute here about more of his motives. Dorothy?
To follow up on both Peter's and Glenna's comments, Guppy wouldn't share information with Talking Home when she was pointing in his favor.
Okay. You're breaking up a little bit there. I got the point. You were making a point about Talking Horn that
Guppy didn't share information with Talking Horn.
Oh, right.
Tries to get information from him.
Right.
About what he knows about Esther and Pot and the possible connection.
Right. Guppy says to Lady Deadlock, don't go to Kinge and Carboy with what I'm telling you, because I haven't told them. This is an affair of my heart and not something that I'm bringing as a legal issue. Yeah. So you're right. He's keeping this from Talking Horn. Thank you. Jonathan?
I wanted to, before we leave the chapter, go to the first paragraph of this chapter that you already quoted in part, Michael. And this is the issue of Dickens and ghosts. We could talk for many, many hours about that. His interest in the supernatural and mesmerism and all that sort of thing. But I love his genius in this writing. To me, when you're talking about the dead coming out of graves and walking around, you have some of those themes, of course, in Tale of Two Cities with that wonderful character, the grave digger, I forget the resurrectionist. But right here he rides. And there's wonderful foreshadowing. I think that what's going on here is just reminding us that some really bad stuff has happened and is happening at Chesney Wold, and the people who occupy the house have secrets and all that sort of thing. He says, "Mist hide the avenues. On all the house there is a cold, blank smell, like the smell of the little church, though something drier, suggesting that the dead and buried deadlocks walk there in the long nights and leave the flavor of their graves behind them." I mean, that's chilling. It is fascinating language, at least to me. I think that Dickens, there's probably ghosts in most of his literature and short stories and all that. And one of his 5 Christmas books, this is the first edition, is called The Haunted Man and the Ghost Bargain. And that was 1848, I think. But anyway, just to point that out, and I think it's an interesting literary device, obviously, and I have not thought through all the ramifications of it. But I think here, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just, I think, foreshadowing all of the issues of the deadlocks and how there's just a dark side to the family. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. Courtney, can we pull the slides down? And we're going to wrap up 29 here real quick. Jonathan, I agree with you. That paragraph, I had that marked. It's absolutely beautifully done. And it brings up again the ghost walk and the curse on the household that will be brought down if, calamity or disgrace. And certainly, no one thinks the household of Sir Leicester is going to be disgraced, but calamity has happened. But pride is going to bring the house down was the curse. Let's go to the end. Let me just walk you through, because what John said is so true. This chapter is funny, and we learned so much by Guppy's conversation with Lady Dedlock. He talks with her about the similarity of the portrait. She denies that there is any similarity between Esther and herself. Guppy says he is motivated to help Esther to establish her relationship and kinship so that she may be included in Jarndyce if possible. Guppy knows of Miss Rachel Barbary, who worked with my lady's sister, and who is now Mrs. Chadband, who somehow Guppy learned of this meeting, perhaps with Mrs. Snagsby, and what discussions came of that. We don't really know how he knows of the information he learned there, but he learned that Esther Summerson is Esther Hawdon, and that the dead law writer was Hawdon. All this is in this chapter. And Lady Dedlock's response, her face is if it goes dead, is what Dickens writes. And it's just an incredible description of someone who's in shock. And then she offers to pay him for bringing her the letters that Guppy says he has access to. And so there's the last quote. I just wanted to bring that up on the next slide, I believe, Courtney, real quick, just because it's such a heart-rending, where Lady Dedlock goes back to her room and breaks down. "Oh, my child, not dead in the first hours of her life, as my cruel sister told me, but sternly nurtured by her after she had renounced me and my name. Oh, my child, oh, my child." And so you can take that down again, Courtney. But that's how the chapter ends. And, it finally broke open for me, of course, what was going on here. And that day, Lady Dedlock does have a heart, and I didn't think quite as evil of her as as I had, because I thought she had given up the child. I don't know if any other first readers, I thought she knew the child was alive, that Esther was alive, and that she had given the child up. But she, was told a lie. So that certainly changed the viewpoint. Anybody else have that experience in their first read? Just crazy me? Okay. All right. You knew he gives you a lot of hints beforehand, but I didn't know that the sister had kept that from her.
I
All
didn't
right.
know that either.
Yeah.
And I'm just reading it for the first time. I didn't know
Oh,
that.
okay. Yeah, okay. Were you did your viewpoint of Lady Dedlock change though when you read this? You read that chapter?
Yes, I guess. I haven't felt like I haven't been anti-deadlock though.
He didn't make her haughty enough for you and proud. Anybody who's bored, I'm already like, get away from me. She was like bored the whole book. They kept talking about how bored she was.
Well, when you got a big secret, you got to act bored, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is, and have a screen to hide your face. Okay, we're going to move through because we're already at 5:30 and we want to get to the Big Bang. So I'm just going to, if we have time for 30 and 31, there's some interesting things that happen there. I love the scenes with Joe. Something is going on there. Again, as a first-time reader, I'm not letting go the eyes in the shutter. And I picked out every one of those quotes. There's like 6 of them. And then he refers to Joe's lustrous eyes. And something's going on with Joe, but I haven't figured that out yet. So don't tell me. But let's go to chapter 32. And when we pull up the illustration there, Courtney, you'll have to scoot down to it. It's near the end, maybe like the third one from the bottom. There it is. So what we know is, then this is, to me, this is even more funny. This chapter, when I couldn't remember who got combusted, and I was reading it, and they were talking about chops and the smell of burnt meat and all these other kinds of things, and the oil dripping in the house, and then Guppy wipes his hand on Weevil's coat, which, only a good friend, you'd wipe your dirty, oily hand on your friend's coat. It just really was funny. And then, of course, it's not so funny when you find out that Crook has exploded in his own home. What we can see here is Weevil, and if anybody is also listening to the audiobook that's on YouTube, that the actress who does that is just incredible. She gives Weevil a kind of monotone. He's kind of a disturbed voice, and you can kind of see that look. He's very disturbed now, of course, after having seen this. And we see Guppy with his candlestick, and I guess it's mostly just smoke left. That's not flame. We see a nice charred doll at the top, which I love that touch by the illustrator as well. And the cat, who didn't get blown up, so I'm not sure where the cat was when Crook blew up. But we see his hat there, and they also find the thread that was around the letters. So we know that they were supposed to meet with Crook at midnight, and it didn't happen. So, there's been a lot of controversy about the spontaneous combustion. I'd heard about that even before I read the book the first time, that, was this a wise artistic choice? Was it something Dickens could get away with? And people had criticized him for that. And then, of course, there's a lot of symbolic quotes that we'll come back to later, that at the very end, and also in the appendix of what the combustion symbolizes, because this was Crook was the faux Lord Chancellor of Chancery, and so Dickens makes a lot of comments about the combustion that relate to his country. So I'm going to turn it over now to John, because he has some things that he wants to share with us. So Courtney, you could bring the slide down, and why don't, John, if you could help us understand this scene and maybe some of the symbolism and how you view it as well, that'd be great, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure, Mike.
Thank you.
I have to reference back to some of the things that we've already discussed before I can deal with spontaneous combustion. One thing that we didn't mention when we were talking about chapters 26, 27, and 28 is that they are a monthly number. And the novel is being published in installments. And those 3 chapters are all narrated by the omniscient narrator. This is the first monthly number in the novel in which there is no chapter narrated by Esther. So I asked the question, why is Esther absent, at least as a narrator, from that monthly number? And that doesn't mean that Esther is absent as a topic of discussion or as something in the background of that chapter, because the young man of the name of Guppy mentions her name, and Esther is very much a subject, but she's not a narrator in this section. And in the monthly number prior to monthly number 9, the one I was just mentioning, 26, 27, and 28, we had the scene that took place in the church where Esther sees Lady Dedlock and is beginning to have some sense of who Lady Dedlock might be in her own life. And in that scene, Hortense is present in the church, and she's staring at Esther, and Lady Dedlock is staring at Esther. And when we discussed that chapter, the scene in the church, David Brownell said this is a recognition scene. And I think we have to complicate that a little bit and say who is recognizing what. And I think in that chapter, Lady Dedlock sees Esther for the very first time and recognizes that Esther is her daughter. And Hortense, who is Lady Dedlock's maid, sees Esther and recognizes that Esther is Lady Dedlock's daughter. And Esther sees Lady Dedlock and Hortense looking at her, and she knows that they are staring at her, but I don't think she has recognized that she is Lady Dedlock's daughter. So my question as a reader reading through this is, when does Esther realize that she is Lady Dedlock's daughter? I think that, and this is part of my interpretation of spontaneous combustion, that Esther does not really want to recognize that Lady Dedlock is her mother, because the implications of that are too threatening. But at the same time, she wants nothing more than to have a mother. And her fantasies about what happened at the time of her birth are part of the mystery of this novel. We've just had one explanation of what happened at Esther's birth, which is the explanation that Lady Dedlock gives. That may not be what happened. That may be the story that Lady Dedlock has been told. That may be also the story that Lady Dedlock wants to believe. What does Esther believe? What does it mean for Esther to begin to recognize that Lady Dedlock might be her mother? Now, The other scene that happens in that same chapter is that there is a thunderstorm, and Esther and Ada take refuge in a keeper's lodge. And Lady Dedlock arrives. And Lady Dedlock says to Esther, "Is it not dangerous to sit in such an exposed place?" Which is a very, it's an expression of concern for a young woman who shouldn't be outside in a thunderstorm. But if Lady Dedlock has recognized that Esther is her daughter, there's another possible meaning to that sentence. Is it not dangerous to sit in such an exposed place? Could also mean, is it not dangerous to me, that is to Lady Dedlock, for you to sit in such an exposed place where your exposure as my daughter, as my illegitimate child, will damage my position in society at the pinnacle of society, and will also bring disgrace to my husband, Sir Leicester, who, although he's a mere baronet, is in his own way at the pinnacle of society, at least at the pinnacle of the society that we have seen. So there are two ways to read it. One is maternal concern for someone who's now just been recognized as her daughter. And the other way is, you are dangerous to me, and the exposure of your face in public close to me will be damaging to me. So how does Esther, one reason that Esther is conflicted about recognizing that Lady Dedlock is her mother is that she knows that she can ruin Lady Dedlock. Her face can ruin Lady Dedlock. And what is the secret that everyone is looking for, that Guppy is looking for, that Talking Horn is looking for, that Jobbling Weevil has been engaged to find out about, that is contained in the handwriting that George has, and what is George's connection? George grew up in the country. He seems to recognize something in Esther's face as well. So we get to spontaneous combustion. Dickens's friend George Henry Lewis, who was a man of science, said this is preposterous. Scientifically, spontaneous combustion does not exist. Dickens protested and said, yes, it does exist. And he cites in the preface to Bleak House examples of spontaneous combustion that prove that there's a long history of observation of, and he claims that spontaneous combustion does exist. And there is a scientific explanation for spontaneous combustion, which is that Crook is an alcoholic. And finally, alcohol combusts internally, and Crook, seated near the fire, explodes. It's preposterous. And Dickens, I think, knew that it was preposterous. but he claims that there is a scientific basis for spontaneous combustion. Spontaneous combustion, in the case of Crook, hovers in an area that I would call the paranormal. It's not supernatural. It's not the cause of, but it's not scientific. It's just something. It's a literary device. It's like a ghost. Are ghosts real in Dickens's novels, or are they just convenient inventions, fictitious inventions? And spontaneous combustion is a metaphor. It's symbolic. Crook is also known as the Lord Chancellor, and he's a double for the Lord Chancellor in Jarndyce and Jarndyce. And Boythorn, we've said almost nothing about Boythorn. We've said very little about Gridley. They think that you should just do away with Chancery. You should blow it up. And here we have the explosion of a, if you will, a structure of that's very similar to, it's the sort of the comic grotesque version of Chancery. A bunch of paper lying around, doing no good in the world. Crook is illiterate, but he's the Lord Chancellor. So in one sense, it's Dickens's answer to what we should do with Chancery. We should just blow the damn thing up, explode it. But that's also a revolutionary thought. Is this explosion of Crook in some way related to the politics of the 1840s with their the Chartist movement and the Luddites? And how do we understand, how do we read the symbolism of spontaneous combustion? Chancery is corrupt. Chancery is doing no good for people in the world. It's causing pain to people like Gridley and Miss Flight. And everyone and everything is in Chancery in some way. It turns out that Lady Dedlock actually owns some property that is in Jarndyce and Jarndyce. And Jarndyce and Jarndyce is, it's everywhere. It touches everyone. Richard is headed toward Jarndyce and Jarndyce with his hopes that somehow he's going to solve the mystery of the suit. So spontaneous combustion in all of those ways has, I think, symbolic reference to the larger social structure and institutional structure of 1851-52 England. But what connection? I keep asking that question, and it's, I think, the crucial question of the novel. What connection is there between the narrative of Crook's spontaneous combustion and the fact that in the same monthly number, Esther falls ill? And we had to skip over those chapters in order to get to spontaneous combustion. So why does Esther fall ill? Esther falls ill because she catches the disease from Charlie, who is her maid. How does Charlie contract the disease? Charlie has been in touch with Joe. How does Joe contract the disease? Joe has been to the graveyard where Hawden Nemo is buried. The theory of disease that was prevalent in the 19th century, at the middle of the century, was that disease was spread through the air. the word malaria, which does not appear in Bleak House, and I'm not suggesting that it does, literally means bad air. Disease, the dominant theory, this is before the germ theory of disease was developed and proved to be accurate, was that there were poisons that were spread through the air. And if you breathed them, you contracted the disease. And there were different kinds of disease, but the dominant term for disease in the 19th century, at least at the middle of the century, was fever. And Dickens had a friend who was a doctor whose name was Thomas Southwood Smith, who wrote the definitive book on fever. And if you look in Bleak House, the word that is used for the disease that spreads from the graveyard to Joe to Charlie to Esther is fever. There comes fever walking up the street is a quote. I forget who says that. Is it Bucket who says that? The argument is usually made that Esther contracts smallpox, but I think her disease is of a different kind. And what connection can there be? And my proposal is that Esther realizes that her face is damaging to her mother, potentially damaging to her mother, because if more people begin to see Esther's face and Lady Dedlock's face, this will bring disgrace and disaster upon her mother, whom she desperately yearns to have as a mother. So what I propose is that Esther spontaneously combusts, and that the two main events of this chapter are the spontaneous combustion of Crook and the spontaneous combustion of Esther. No one else who contracts the disease has facial disfigurement. Only Esther has facial disfigurement. I think that Esther realizes that she needs to destroy the evidence that will incriminate her mother. And the best way to do that is to destroy her face. Now, the explanation that the disease that she contracts is smallpox and that the disfigurement is the result of the spread of that disease is perfectly plausible and scientific, and it would have satisfied George Henry Lewis. And in fact, it's the dominant way that people see and understand and talk about Esther's disfigurement. And Dickens is often cited for his close attention to medical issues. We've already talked about the Smallweeds as suffering from a peculiar form of small-headedness. I forget the name of that disease. But I'm suggesting that other people who contract the disease don't get disfigured, and that Esther wants to disfigure herself in order to protect her mother. So my theory, and I like it a lot, is that Esther engages in what psychoanalysis is called pathological accommodation. And we know that Esther has a low self-esteem, that Esther doesn't think very highly of herself. And for her to sacrifice herself in order to protect her mother is a perfectly, to me, plausible explanation for why she alone becomes disfigured among the people who contract this illness. That the source of her disfigurement is, and this is sort of a technical term, autogenic. That is, its origin is her own self, that it's self-generated. And I think there's evidence later in the novel, and I don't want to do spoilers to support this, but that's my explanation of why, after having been absent in monthly number 9, in monthly number 10, we have 2 explosions, both of them generated from within the body or within the mind, within the psyche of Esther, that produce explosions. And that's my theory of spontaneous combustion. Now, one other piece of evidence that I would cite is what I think is a crucial passage in the chapter we skipped over called Nurse and Patient. And it's narrated by Esther. And I'm going to read the paragraph. It's on page 489 in the Penguin edition. And it's a passage that is very puzzling. And I think it's related to these issues that I've been proposing. So here's the paragraph. This is in Esther's narration, Esther's voice. I had no thought that night, none, I am quite sure, of what was soon to happen to me. But I have always remembered since that when we had stopped at the garden gate to look up at the sky, and when we went upon our way, I had for a moment an undefinable impression of myself as being something different from what I then was. I know it was then and there that I had it. I have ever since connected the feeling with that spot and time, and with everything associated with that spot and time, to the distant voices in the town, the barking of the dog, and the sound of wheels coming down the miry hill. So what is she talking about? And notice that she's writing in the present tense. This is Esther, the retrospective narrator. I had a thought that night, none I am quite sure of what was soon to happen to me. Esther, the character, doesn't know what's going to happen soon to her. This is Esther, the narrator, who knows everything because she has lived through it and knows that something is going to happen to her, that is going to happen to the character, Esther, that she was, and that is crucially important. And we can say, oh, she had a kind of foreknowledge of the disease she was going to contract and of the disfigurement that would result from it. We could say that Dickens is using a kind of foreshadowing here, warning the reader to anticipate something. But it's Esther who has that knowledge, Esther, the narrator. And the crucial phrase is, I had for a moment an undefinable impression of myself as being something different from what I then was. She doesn't tell us what it is. An undefinable impression of that I was something different from what I then was. I think this is my part of my theory about spontaneous combustion, that this is the moment where Esther realizes who her mother is. Up until this point, she's had unconsciously these weird experiences of hallucination and emotional disturbance when she sees Lady Dedlock's face, but she hasn't made the connection. Esther is one of the detectives in the book. She wants nothing more than to know what happened at the moment of her birth, but she doesn't want to know it. She wants to know who her mother is, but she doesn't want to know who her mother is because of the implications that would result from that. Psychological, social, societal, and that would happen to her mother. If she then, at this moment in Nurse and Patient, knows that she is Lady Dedlock's daughter, then it's possible, I would argue, that she knows what the consequences of that revelation would be. And in order to protect her mother, disfigures herself. She explodes spontaneously, like Crook. It's 3 o'clock California time. We don't have time to talk about this anymore because we have to stop.
Well, thank you, John, though. It makes perfect sense that that's another view of spontaneous combustion. And I had that passage marked because I didn't understand it either, that how was she different from what she then was? So it's something to give us to think about. Maybe we can bring it up again when we know more about what happens with Esther. We know she ends that section with she's blind. And at first I thought, well, does that mean she's also blind and not seeing who her mother is? But you're saying it's that she's, brought this on so she can protect her mother, perhaps. Anybody else have any parting comments?
I just want to say, let's talk about this again next time. John, you brought up so many provocative ideas. I want to discuss them.
Yeah.
You should debate it.
Yeah, I'm really eager to know what people think about this. So
Love it.
We'll see you next month. Thank you, Mike, for helping us to get through these chapters. One last thing I'll say is that monthly number 10 is exactly halfway through the novel. And halfway through the novel is for Dickens a point that is often a turning point in the plot.
Ew, the plot thickens.
A plot, boy, does it thicken. It's all over the place. It's a messy, gooey explosion. So thank you for listening to my.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you for giving us so much to think about.
Thank you, Michael. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good job, Michael.
I like